My boyfriend's father didn't know I was the surgeon who saved his other son's life. He spent most of Thanksgiving dinner explaining to me why women shouldn't be in operating rooms. I need to back up. My name is Claire, and I am a cardiothoracic surgeon. I'm 31 years old. I've been operating since I was 27, which I know sounds young, but I finished college at 19, medical school at 23, and I've been in residency and fellowship longer than most people spend in a full career. I don't say any of this to brag. I say it because it matters later. My boyfriend is named Ryan. We met 2 years ago at a coffee shop near the hospital where I work, not a romantic story, honestly. He spilled his Americano on my laptop bag, offered to replace it. I told him that wasn't necessary. And somehow we ended up talking for 3 hours. He's a high school history teacher. He coaches JV baseball. He makes the best chicken tacos I've ever had in my life, and he always knows when I need silence versus when I need someone to talk at. I love him. That part is simple. What's complicated is that Ryan and his father have a difficult relationship. His dad's name is Gerald. Gerald is 67 years old, retired from 22 years in the Army as a staff sergeant, and has very firm opinions about how the world works. Ryan warned me about this early on. He's not a bad person, Ryan told me on our 4th date. He just came up in a time and a world where things were a certain way, and he never really updated his software. I appreciated the honesty. I wasn't worried. I have dealt with difficult attendings, hostile colleagues, and surgical boards full of men who looked at me like I had wandered into the wrong room. Gerald couldn't be worse than any of that. I also want to explain something about why I never mentioned my job in detail to Ryan's family before this dinner. Early in our relationship, Ryan asked me if we could just keep things simple when I met his dad. His family already thought Ryan had made too many soft choices in life, teaching instead of business, staying in their mid-sized Ohio town instead of moving somewhere ambitious. Ryan didn't want his father to immediately make our relationship into a comparison contest. If he finds out you're a surgeon right away, he'll spend the whole dinner making me feel small, Ryan told me. Can we just say you work in healthcare for now? Just until he gets comfortable with you as a person first? I wasn't thrilled about it, but I understood, and honestly, I'm private about my work anyway. When I'm not in the hospital, I'm not in the hospital, so I agreed. We told Gerald I worked in healthcare. That was technically true. For almost 18 months, that held. Gerald and I had met 4 or 5 times, always brief, always at family holidays or Ryan's nephew's birthday parties, always in settings where deep conversation wasn't really the format. Gerald was polite enough to me. Cordial. He called me Ryan's girl, which I let go every single time. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't cruel. Then, Thanksgiving came. This was a bigger gathering than usual. Ryan's mother Linda had decided she wanted everyone under one roof, Gerald and Linda, Ryan, his older brother Derek and Derek's wife Patrice, Derek's 2 kids, and me. First time I was being folded into an actual family holiday. Ryan was nervous about it for weeks beforehand. Just remember he means well, Ryan said in the car on the way there. And if he says something that bothers you, just give him a beat. He usually corrects himself. I squeezed his hand. I've handled worse. And I had. What I didn't tell Ryan was that worse included a 6-hour open-heart surgery on a 34-year-old man 7 months earlier, a surgery where the patient coded twice on the table, where I made a call that most of the senior surgeons on my floor said they wouldn't have made, and where that man walked out of the hospital 19 days later to go home to his wife and their 1-year-old daughter. That man's name was Derek. Ryan's older brother Derek. I had not made the connection until about 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, when Ryan showed me a photo on his phone of Derek at a family barbecue from the summer. I recognized him immediately, not his face exactly, because I almost never see my patients fully conscious and vertical before surgery, but the name, the age, the timeline, the specificity of the procedure. I had operated on a Derek Calloway from Dayton, Ohio, 34 years old, emergency admission in late March. The man in the photo was Derek Calloway from Dayton, Ohio, 34 years old, looking healthy and laughing with a baby on his hip. I sat with that information for a moment. Then I asked Ryan very carefully whether his brother had been in the hospital earlier that year. Ryan went quiet. He had a heart thing in the spring, he said. It was serious. They weren't sure he was going to make it. He doesn't really like to talk about it. I nodded. I did not say anything else. It was not my information. To share patient privacy is not something I treat casually, and more than that, I didn't know how to have that conversation without it becoming something enormous. Ryan didn't know what I did, not really. His family thought I worked in healthcare. The truth was suddenly very large and very complicated, and Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. I made the decision to tell Ryan before the dinner. I planned to. I wrote out what I wanted to say approximately 4 times in my head during my commute. I just kept not finding the right moment. And then it was Thanksgiving week and we were in the car and Ryan was nervous and I told myself I would find a way to bring it up that evening, after dinner, when things were calm. I did not anticipate that Gerald would make it significantly harder to stay calm. Dinner started well enough. Linda is a genuinely warm woman who hugged me at the door and immediately handed me a glass of wine and asked about my drive. Derek was quieter than I expected. He shook my hand and thanked me for coming and then mostly focused on his kids, which I respected. Patrice was funny and easy to talk to and spent 20 minutes describing a home renovation project that had clearly become a years-long war with a contractor. Then we sat down to eat. Gerald sat at the head of the table. He had dressed up button-down shirt, neat slacks, the kind of effort that told me Linda had asked him to make a good impression. That was sweet. He poured gravy with authority. He told a story about a Thanksgiving he spent stationed in Germany that everyone at the table had clearly heard before but laughed at anyway. He was, genuinely, not the monster I had been slightly braced for. And then Linda mentioned that there was a new cardiothoracic chief of surgery at the regional hospital. They brought in someone from Johns Hopkins, Linda said. A woman, actually. I read about it in the paper. 30-something. It's quite an accomplishment. Gerald made a sound that I can only describe as a considered, I don't doubt she's competent, he said, in the tone of a man who was about to explain why competence wasn't the whole story. But there are certain physical and psychological demands in a surgical environment. High stakes, high pressure, split-second decisions. Men are wired for that environment in a way that's just biological. Ryan's hand found my knee under the table. I cut a piece of turkey. I chewed it. I reminded myself I was a guest and that it was a holiday. My unit had a female medic in my second tour, Gerald continued, warming to the subject. Sharp girl. But when things got real, when it was actual life or death, she froze. Just froze. And that's not a personal failing, that's just nature. There's a reason combat roles were men for thousands of years. One data point, Derek said mildly, not looking up from his plate. It's not one data point, it's documented, Gerald said. The military spent decades figuring this out. Women are tremendous in support roles. Tremendous. But cutting someone's chest open and making calls when that person is flatlining? I'm sorry, but that's a different thing. I looked at Derek across the table. Derek was looking at his mashed potatoes with an expression. I recognized the expression of a person who has had this argument before and decided it cost too much. What do you actually do in healthcare? Gerald asked me then, turning his attention my direction with the slightly generous air of a man including someone in a conversation. Are you a nurse? I work in the operating room, I said. Scrub tech? I operate, I said. He nodded slowly, interpreting this in the way he preferred to. Assisting then, supporting the surgeon. That's important work. Ryan made a small sound beside me. Not quite a word, more like something escaping. I'm sure the surgeon you work with is glad to have you, Gerald said, and he meant it kindly, which was almost more astonishing than if he'd meant it as an insult. He genuinely, fully believed he was being gracious. I picked up my wine glass. I thought about my morning. I had been in the hospital by 5:30 for a pre-op consult. At 7, I had repaired an aortic dissection on a 60-year-old man who had arrived by helicopter. By 11, I was teaching a second-year resident how to close. Gerald was explaining to me, over Linda's excellent stuffing, that women were suited to support roles. What made you interested in medicine? Linda asked me, with the practiced redirect of a woman who has been smoothing her husband's conversational edges for 40 years. My grandmother had a heart attack when I was 9, I said. She survived, but only because she happened to be near a good hospital. I remember the surgeon coming out to talk to our family. I remember thinking that's the person who decides whether people get to come home. Gerald nodded with genuine feeling. That's a beautiful reason to go into healthcare, he said. Nursing is an incredible profession. Undervalued. Derek set down his fork. The sound of it was quiet, but everyone at the table heard it. Dad, Derek said. I'm paying her a compliment, Derek. Claire is a cardiothoracic surgeon, Derek said. He said it the way you say something that is simply factually true, and has been true for a while. He said it looking at his father without any drama in his voice. Just clarity. She's the attending surgeon at Mercy General. She has been for 3 years. The table went quiet. Gerald looked at Derek. Then he looked at me. Something was moving behind his eyes. Recalibration, I think. "You're a surgeon," he said. "Yes," I said. "A heart surgeon. Cardiothoracic, yes. Mostly cardiac." He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a person absorbing new information and not yet sure what to do with it. "Why didn't you? Ryan said you worked in healthcare." "I do work in healthcare," I said. "Ryan asked me to keep things simple for a while. I was respecting that." Gerald looked at Ryan, who was looking at the table with the expression of a man who understood that several things were about to be discussed, and that some of them were about him. "I didn't want you to make her feel like a competition," Ryan said quietly. "Every time I talk about my life, you find a way to make it sound like I lost something. I didn't want that at dinner." That landed. I could see it land. Gerald's jaw tightened, and then released. Then Derek said, "She operated on me." Another silence. This one different. Linda put her hand over her mouth. "In March," Derek said. He was still looking at his father, steady and calm, the way someone talks when they've made peace with something and are now just delivering its contents. "When I was admitted, emergency surgery. It was bad, Dad. I told you it was bad, but I don't think you understood how bad." I coded twice on the table. He paused. "Claire was my surgeon." Gerald turned to look at me. Really look at me. Maybe for the first time that evening. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't feel like I was making it about myself. "You saved my son," Gerald said. His voice was different now. Flatter, stripped of its earlier confidence. "I was doing my job," I said. Which is the only honest answer. It's what I tell every family. It's not modesty. It's precision. I do not perform miracles. I perform procedures, and the difference matters. "She was doing her job," Derek said. "Really, really well." Gerald sat back in his chair. He looked at his plate. He looked at his hands. He looked at Derek, who was alive and healthy and sitting across from him because a woman in her early 30s had spent 6 hours making decisions under conditions Gerald had just explained, with authority, women were not suited for. The silence stretched out for long enough that Patrice quietly got up and refreshed the bread basket, which I thought was the single most graceful act of Thanksgiving I had ever witnessed. "I owe you an apology," Gerald said finally. He said it to me, directly. "Several of them." "You don't have to," I started. "I do," he said. "I sat at this table and I explained your own profession to you like you didn't." He stopped. Tried again. "I've spent a lot of years being confident about things I understood. I don't like realizing I was confident about something I didn't understand at all. There was something real in that. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. And honesty at that level, the kind where a person doesn't soften their own failure, just looks at it, that's not nothing." "Thank you," I said. "And I meant it." Linda was crying quietly. She covers her face when she cries, just fingertips over her mouth, and she was doing that now. Ryan was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a name for at the time. Later that night, he told me it was the look of someone watching a person they love be fully, completely themselves for the first time in front of the people who matter. I told him that was a little dramatic. He said I should probably just accept the compliment. We stayed through dessert and then through a long stretch afterward where Gerald asked me, haltingly at first and then with more genuine curiosity, what my days were actually like, what the training was like, how long before someone can operate independently, whether I got scared. I told him the truth that I don't get scared during surgery because there isn't room for it, but that sometimes afterward, when I'm driving home at midnight, the weight of it shows up. He nodded at that like it matched something he already knew from a different context. Derek walked me and Ryan out to the car when we left. He hugged me, which he had never done before. He held on for a moment longer than a casual hug. "I never knew how to bring it up," he said into my shoulder. "I knew it was you. I recognized your name when Ryan said it. I just didn't know how to make that not weird." "It's not weird," I said. "It's just a lot." "Yeah," he said. "It's a lot." On the drive home, Ryan was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I'm sorry I asked you to hide it." "You didn't ask me to hide it. You asked me to keep it simple." Same thing, in retrospect. I thought about that. It meant he had to reckon with it himself, I said. If I'd announced it at the door, he could have decided how he felt about me from a distance. He didn't get that option tonight. He actually had to update his thinking in real time, in front of his family. I think that was harder, and I think it probably mattered more. Ryan was quiet again. Then, "When were you going to tell me about Derek?" That night, I said. I kept planning to and then not finding the moment, and then Thanksgiving was here. That's a big thing to be carrying around. I know. You're allowed to tell me things, he said. Hard things. You don't have to manage everything alone. I looked out the window at the dark Ohio highway and I thought about what it means to be someone who is trained to make decisions in isolation, who has learned to keep their hands steady and their voice level and their doubts internal, because that is how the work gets done, and how that same training, outside the operating room, can look like distance when it isn't, can look like secrecy when it's just habit. I know, I said again. I'm working on it. He reached over and held my hand for the rest of the drive. I think about Gerald sometimes, about how certain he was, and how that certainty wasn't malicious, it was just calcified. It had never been challenged in a way he couldn't dismiss. And I think about the fact that his son is alive, is coaching his kids' soccer games, and renovating his kitchen and arguing with his contractor, because on a Tuesday night in March, I stayed in that operating room, and I made the calls I was trained to make. That's not a story about proving anyone wrong. I didn't walk into Thanksgiving dinner with anything to prove. I was just there to meet the family. Gerald's assumptions were his own construction and they collapsed under their own weight when reality showed up. But I do think there's something worth sitting with in the fact that the people who doubt you most confidently are often the people who have benefited most from being wrong. They just don't always get the chance to find out. Gerald called me 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. He had found an article about a cardiothoracic surgical training program and wanted to know if I thought it was reputable. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked good questions. I didn't tell him that, but I thought it.